Hello there, world, wherever you are. My name is Mike, and this is the There Will Be Geek podcast. And with me are...
I'm Kev.
And I'm Chani.
And this week, we have been mostly doing various different things that are geeky and nerdy, but I'm going to hand over to my lovely esteemed colleagues to tell you a little bit more. So, first of all, to Kev.
Okay, well, today we're debuting the first in a regular segment called Thimble of Win. Now, a theme tune is going to go there eventually, so we'll all just imagine our own for a second. So this is going to be sort of a semi-regular segment where we talk about things that have sent our geek hearts a flutter during the week. It could be anything. It could be a particularly good episode of TV, a movie, a book, absolutely anything. And I'm going to kick it off with Lost Themes 2, the new album by legendary horror director John Carpenter.
Oh, great.
And this is Lost Themes 2. There was a part 1 released last year. And it's great. It's if you've ever seen any of John Carpenter's films, and if you haven't, why haven't you? You should be. You'll know that he's mostly composed the music for them as well. And has a very distinctive style. A very sort of synth-heavy, sparse, atmospheric approach to music, which has been very influential on sort of the modern synth movement. And it's an interesting case because it sort of marked a bit of a career renaissance for the guy. The first 20 years or so of his film career, which was sort of mid-70s to around the mid-90s, the guy was knocking out of the park everywhere. There's a string of classics. Dark Star, Sold on Precinct 13, Escape from New York, The Thing, They Live, Big Trouble in Little China. There's tons of them. He had a run of about 10, 15 years there where every single movie was a classic. Then around the mid-90s, he kind of, I don't like the phrase lost it, because I sort of don't believe in that, but he went through a bit of a dodgy period. The films he was producing weren't as good, they were coming out less often, and he did speak a lot in interviews about feeling burned out on the filmmaking process and kind of disappeared off the map. Up until around last year, when the first Lost Themes came out, he came out with an album of music. And it's that rare thing of an artist having a comeback in a different sort of segment of the entertainment industry, which is something you don't see very often. And that album was great. This new one, Lost Themes 2, is also great. And as I said, if you're familiar at all with John Carpenter's scores, you know what to expect, and it's everything you'd want it to be. It's a great listen. For gamers as well, great for games. Probably because of the synth. But, I played through Fallout 4 with Lost Themes, the first one on loop. And it's just perfect.
See, I just have Civilization on loop, just me going, bunga, 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 I don't want to leave the jungle, no, 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 just over and over again.
Can you record? I'll get that recording, and I'll play Fallout to that, and see how it goes.
Done.
You are both crazy.
Carpenter may have competition now.
Yeah.
Just saying.
I know.
Okay, so Chani, you had a game launch this week.
Yeah, there was a event down at Acme, for those who don't know, that's the Australian Centre of Moving Image that we have here in Melbourne at Fed Square. So this was a launch party for the game Enter the Gungeon. It comes out from Devolver Digital. It's pretty cool. It is like a top-down shooter. It's very reminiscent of old school Legend of Zelda games or the new Binding of Isaac as well. It was a fun game to play. I had a good night. We got to speak to developers and artists from Devolver as well via webcam, because obviously they're in different parts of the world. There was Dave, who had actually worked on Enter the Gungeon, and then there was also Rock Ray, who worked on another game, which I cannot pronounce the name of it for the life of me, but it's in alpha at the moment, I believe. I got to play that and I really liked it. It was all based on Greek mythology and stuff. So that was kind of cool. And I got a free Steam code for Broforce. So I'm going to be doing that this long weekend.
Broforce is good fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you'll dig it.
Yep. So I'm very excited to play with that.
And see, for me, the win this week is also one that's obviously going to be tinged with a certain amount of sadness, because this is the win that came about at the Terry Pratchett Memorial Service. I think I can speak for a lot of us out there when I remember last year when we had the news that Terry had passed away, and personally was devastated because the idea that I was never going to receive any more books or see any more of his work again just floored me completely. Massively influential, one of my very favourite writers of all time, and just somebody who you always knew you were in safe hands with. Somebody who was on the right side and on the side of all that was good and decent in this world and was bloody funny at it as well. But the win comes from the note that was read out by Neil Gaiman at the memorial, that there will be an adaptation of Good Omens on the TV with Terry's blessing. And the moment that happened, I was extraordinarily happy because Good Omens, again, there are so many of us out there who this has been a fixture of our bookshelves for the last 25 or so years, and we have constantly reread it. I think at least once a year or once every 2 years, I will reread it, and it never, ever gets old. The radio adaptation was glorious. I really, really thoroughly enjoyed the radio version, even with a small cameo in with Terry and Neil, which was beautiful. I'm really, really excited by this. I cannot wait for it to come. With the fact that other gaming properties are being developed as well, I mean, obviously American Gods is coming soon, much sooner than we thought, and that's really shaping up to be amazing. The on-off, kind of what's going to happen with regards to the Sandman, that could be incredibly good. I'm really pleased to see some more of these kind of properties that have been there for a while finally started to see fruition. And now, that kind of leads us quite nicely into our main subject for discussion for this podcast, which is comic book film adaptations. Now, we've had a lot of discussions about this over the last few weeks, just generally toing and froing, particularly, obviously, if you listened to our last podcast, you heard our less than favourable reviews of Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice.
More like Yawn of Justice. Yeah, I will see
Hero Week.
I'll see myself out. It's fine.
Yeah, try to be. And yes, so we thought after that it would be worth our while looking into a little bit about the history of the comic book adaptations, where they kind of really started to explode culturally and critically to the beast that it is now, and where it's going into the future. Now, looking into this, we found out that pretty much one of the very earliest forms of this comic book adaptation to movie was in the cinema series of the 40s. So the earliest one we could find example of for the moment, and I'm prepared to be corrected here, was the Captain Marvel series from 1941. And around about that time, we also get several series to do with Batman and Superman. And these were kind of your little kind of 30-minute Saturday morning cinema serials that would be rushed out to screens, filmed very much in a hurry, and would be lapped up by the kind of eager young cinema audiences of the time, alongside other properties, things such as the Flash Gordons or your Buck Rogers or a number of different things, or even Dick Tracy. There's a lot of other different kind of adventure serials that were just there for kids and for anyone else who wanted to watch them, but mostly for kids in cinemas, so they could get them there first thing on a Saturday morning and sort of sat there wrapped with attention. And pretty much that's it for a while in terms of the big screen. I mean, we get the George Reeves Batman in the late 50s, early 60s. We get the George Reeves Superman. My apologies. Yeah. God, what am I doing? George Reeves Superman, which again, I remember watching when I was younger. It was repeated on TV a few times. And it's actually, for the time, it's not too bad. And then later on, you get the 60s Batman. And at that point, we get the first kind of real big screen adaptation in a feature-length movie with the Batman 1966 movie. What are everyone's thoughts on that particular period?
I think it's one of those things that I've gone back and forth on over the years, because it was a big thing when we were kids. We all loved it. And I guess the zeitgeist kind of thing. I mean, in the last sort of 20, 30 years, because the comic book field has been taken a lot more seriously, I think there's been a tendency to look back on it as being cheesy, as being, rather unfortunate. I mean, though in recent years, I've seen the odd bit here and there and enjoyed it a lot more. I mean, I think purely because we've had so long of taking these characters so seriously, the sheer abandon of that series has actually come around and become quite refreshing again.
Interestingly enough as well, there's a couple of things on that. Obviously, there are now Lego sets to go with that particular series.
Lego!
which is pretty damn awesome. But also, here's the other thing. We all round this table know that the moment anyone says, "What's the Batman theme?" you've got that in your head. The Batman theme music, everybody knows this. And it's always the Batman theme music for the TV series from the 60s. Even the sort of terrible joke, kind of science joke of sodium, 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 Batman, with the symbol of sodium being Na. And it's a dumb little joke, but everyone goes, na, 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 na. And you know, without having to worry about it. It's been parodied so many times with The Simpsons and God knows what else. It's become pretty much part of, and it has a massive cultural impact. And there was a film adaptation that went with that. And that was one of the very first kind of really big adaptations to hit the screen. Now, we don't really see much again till we start to get the 70s, and quite often it ends up being backdoor pilots for stuff. But the first time we really get something properly done in the 70s, which really kind of, I would say to an extent, is genesis for the modern comic book adaptation, is Superman. Late 70s, first Superman movie, Christopher Reeve.
Yeah, because it was kind of the first time that they'd made a comic book or superhero adaptation on a real blockbuster level.
Exactly.
They went, no, we're going to throw money into this, we're going to get a top-class director, and we're going to make a legitimate movie out of this.
As opposed to just a kind of a backdoor pilot for a whole bunch of TV series. Like for example, later on in the decade, you get The Amazing Spider-Man, which I remember watching that series.
With his amazing colander eyes, yeah.
Goodness, yes, let's not even go there. But again, that's what the budget allowed. But this first Superman movie, the Richard Donner Superman movie, again, you watch that still stands up incredibly well today. Christopher Reeve is an amazing screen presence. He's still, in many people's eyes, he is Superman. And frankly, will be for a long time to come.
I don't know. I think Henry has kind of replaced him for me. I'm in love with Superman now.
Oh, that's fair enough, and you're entitled to you're entitled to your wrong opinion.
No, I mean, and to be fair though, Henry Cavill himself is very good. I've got big problems with the way the character's been interpreted, but I mean, in terms of performance, I think he's perfectly fine, and would make an equally as good, if not better, Superman with a different approach. But that's not his fault.
But again, this is the thing: when you get to when you get to Superman in 1977, it's also one of the first times that you have the property being taken seriously. It's not the Batman from the 60s has that campy approach because there's something that goes right the way through it, and it works because there is a consistency, and that kind of works in some of the fun, silly vibe of a lot of 60s television. But then you get Superman, and it's not quite gritty, but it's definitely a 70s film. I mean, throughout 70s films, generally, you have got a slightly gritty, slightly realistic, slightly kind of used world aesthetic. You don't tend to find all that much in the way of everyone looking clean. I mean, for example, that Superman movie is blatantly set and partially filmed in New York. And that's wonderful because it feels like it is 70s New York. I mean, most of it was actually filmed in the UK, but a large chunk of it feels like a 70s American city. And in reality, this could be. And Clark Kent and Superman both feel like actual rounded characters, people having reasonable, sensible conversations. Same with Lois Lane. And the way that the Daily Planet offices looks like it's not all the President's Men, but it bears comparison with them in terms of the actual layout of the office and the way people are conducting themselves in there. And so it's taking the property seriously.
Yeah.
Which again is, I think, at the root of where this comes from, the kind of why these movies start to become bigger. And it takes an awfully long time for that to happen again, because you've got the Superman movies of the late 70s and then up to Superman 3. And then after that, well, there's Superman 4.
Well, I think the problem there to a large extent was for that particular period, when it comes to sort of the big blockbuster level, Superman was pretty much the only game in town. It was the only property being handled at that level. And really, after the first movie, and the first movie isn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but the quality level starts to plummet after the first one, until you get to Superman 4, which is just a hilarious sort of, kryptonite train wreck.
There's something we can probably have a little bit of discussion around things like canon movies at some point further down the line on this one, but that we'll put a pin in that for now. That's a whole world of nonsense we can get into there.
But it was very much a case where Superman was the one he was the character who was getting the big prestige level movies. And that started to decline. And really, if it wasn't for the first Tim Burton Batman movie, it could have actually killed superheroes, on the proper big screen for many years to come.
Yes, now that gets us into 1989 and that first Tim Burton movie, which we rewatched recently together a few months ago. And
it doesn't hold up.
It really doesn't hold up. It has a lot going for it, but there is way too much time given over to Jack Nicholson. And that's understandable because it's how they managed to get Jack Nicholson as the Joker, and that's fine. He is very good in the part, but realistically, it's not a Batman movie, it's a Joker movie, because he is that much front and center of the whole shebang.
Well, I mean, there's also the Tim Burton factor.
Yes.
I mean, Burton's notorious for this. I mean, he adapts all these properties, but really, they're all Tim Burton movies with sort of, a coating of this particular property or franchise he's adapting. And that movie was very much... I mean, look, you and me, Mike, we're old farts. We were there at the time. We remember how this thing was marketed.
I was 5.
Yes.
Shut up.
I was going to stay down here. It's fine.
It was sold on the back of, The Dark Knight, on the back of Watchmen, on the back of, all this hype behind adult-level comics hitting the mainstream.
And also, to an extent, 2000 AD.
Yeah, to a lot. I mean, you could argue that as well.
Yeah.
But very much this idea that, no, this ain't Yo Daddy's Batman.
Yeah.
That's the first time we heard that. And this idea that it was going to be a darker vision. It was
and on top of that, I mean, sadly, obviously, yesterday's news, we had Prince passing away. Prince, who was amazing and huge in the 80s. Prince is doing the soundtrack for this. And this is just unheard of levels of, oh, my word.
The bad dance.
But I remember a lot of hype about the darkness of it. And the fabled sex scene between Michael Keaton and Kim Basinger that I think is still even surfaced. That reportedly they had shot was going to give the film an R rating. Do you remember this one?
I don't, but...
That's something that's been hovering around for a few years. And as far as I know, no one has actually been able to corroborate with footage. Probably for the best.
Yeah, I'd say so.
I don't want to see that.
But here's the thing, I mean, Keaton himself is an interesting and engaging choice as Bruce Wayne because he tones his normal zaniness down a little bit, and he was not everyone's idea of what Bruce Wayne should be, and yet he completely owned the role.
Well, it's funny, I mean, in the history of sort of screen Batmen, general bat persons, Bruce Wayne has always been the side of it that the films have struggled with.
Yes.
Most of the screen Batmen have not really been able to nail Bruce Wayne very well. I think Batfleck does a pretty good job of it.
Did you say Batfleck?
Yes.
Batfleck.
That's awesome. I haven't heard that before.
Really?
Oh, wow. No, you're right. Batfleck is pretty awesome. I mean, Keaton was good. Val Kilmer was meh. George Clooney was barely noticeable. Christian Bale, because that's interestingly more of a Bruce Wayne movie than a series than a Batman series in terms of the Dark Knight series. Christian Bale nails it pretty well because he is Bruce Wayne who happens to put the bat mask on.
He's my favorite.
As opposed to Batman who happens to be Bruce Wayne.
Yeah. Well, the Keaton's approach is very much like that, where it's this very idiosyncratic sort of awkward guy who has this very sort of clear dark side. Yeah. And very much the same idea, but in a more kind of heightened way, maybe.
So we've got the Batman series. I mean, obviously there's the Batman Returns, which I didn't like so much when I saw it at the time, but then in subsequent viewings realised it was a much better movie than Batman. And then there's...
It had Catwoman.
Yes, exactly. Oh, God, at that moment when they both realise who they are, when they're dancing, and there's like, are we supposed to start fighting now? And it's a beautifully, beautifully observed little moment. Then we get Batman Forever, which... opinion is divided on around this table. I mean, it was perfectly reasonable at the time, but actually really has not dated well. However, someone in our group loves that movie for one particular reason.
Jim Carrey! I love Jim Carrey. He's awesome. He can do no wrong in everything that he is in. Is brilliant.
Yeah, we may discuss the mask later.
But not Son of the Mask.
No, Chris. Oh, goodness, no. Anyway, less said about Clooney's movie, the better, because, and again, it's not Clooney's fault. He just has very little to do. They could have put anyone in there. They could have put a complete unknown in that role, and it really would have not made any difference, because, well, for starters, the bat nipples. But also, let's face it, it's a busy movie. We had this talk about this earlier on, and there's so much going on there. You've got Schwarzenegger, you've got Thurman, you've got Silverstone, you've got
Batman
Chris
and Robin.
O'Donnell. There's Batman. That's what I mean. We're talking about the Clooney Batman and Robin.
Oh, I was still thinking about
from
Batman
a tonal
Forever.
perspective,
Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll catch up. I got distracted.
that's all right. I'm barely on point myself right now.
Jim Carrey has that effect on me, okay? Just...
Do you want to?
Do you want
to step outside for a few seconds, find somewhere private? We won't judge you. It's okay. But no, those Joel Schumacher movies. I mean, they were very much a throwback to, and they were seen very much a throwback to all the '60s.
Yeah, the campiness.
The campiness, which at the time was very, very unpopular. But then again, I mean, watching the original Burton Batman.
Yeah.
I mean, we spotted that tonally, it's a lot closer to the '60s show.
Yeah.
In terms of the camp than I think we noticed at the time or what they sold that movie on.
Well, to be fair, at the time we were like 13, 14, so I'm not sure if we would have noticed all of those kind of nuances.
No, I saw Highlander 2 and thought it was the greatest thing ever. I was a fuckwit when I was 14. I kind of got better.
I'm so glad I've never seen that movie.
Oh, I have plans.
Oh, God.
Oh, I have plans.
And we will deal with that further down the line. But yes, apart from the Batman stuff, again, we're relatively quiet on superhero. We start to have other comic book adaptations in the 90s, but there's not that many. I mean, a large chunk of them also are built around the kind of the hero model. So we've got, for example, there was the TV movie, the Captain America movie, which I remember watching and thinking that was okay. It was nothing more. It was there's nothing on. It's Saturday evening. I may as well watch this anyway whilst I'm doing my homework.
And also, I don't know if you're aware of this. You are aware that the guy who played Captain America in that movie was like J.D. Salinger's great grandson or something like that.
Mind you,
that's just a little bit of trivia that makes it even more surreal. Really.
Well, there's that. There's also that one of the kids in the Narnia movies is some kind of a descendant of Darwin.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Now, again, that's bizarre enough as it is, but we're getting sidetracked here. So we've got Captain America. We also end up having things like The Shadow and Phantom and those kind of Alec Baldwin as a superhero. Billy Zane as a superhero.
I like the Phantom. Anyone with the last name Walker is brilliant.
Well, yes.
Brilliant.
You listen to your friend Billy Zane. He's a cool dude. He's trying to help you out.
I think it's just weird. Like, I don't know. I was going to talk about how right now we're focusing on comics that are basically just superheroes, when at that time there were a whole heap of other film adaptations of comics that weren't necessarily huge superheroes.
Yeah.
Like Tank Girl and
Yes.
Judge Dredd.
Oh, that was amazing.
And those kind of things as well. And they were a totally different, like they were comic book movies, but they were like a different genre, like a subsection of comic book movies.
Yeah. And interesting enough, I was about to get onto something else there. There's another notable property from that period, which is still stands up beautifully to this day and has always been one of my very, very favourite pieces. And that is the wonderful, beautiful masterpiece that is The Crow. I remember that came out when we were in our first year of university. I remember the first time I actually watched that movie was at our halls of residence, where we were both living at the time. I hadn't met you by this point, but this was in our halls of residence on like a big screen at the end. It had been rented, it had come out in video. So this was like 1994 sometime, and I was mesmerized. And I have watched it constantly ever since. It still stands up as a beautiful, beautiful piece of work. Brandon Lee, Michael Wincott. Michael Wincott is one of the most amazing villains you will ever see in that movie.
Yeah, he is great. Yeah.
Dark and twisted and wonderful, and that lovely, lovely drawl of his. He's just mesmerizing to watch. But again, comic book adaptations. I mean, yes, we've got your Tank Girl, we've got your Crow, we've got your JoJo. Other interesting properties starting to being taken over, but there's still they're still kind of not quite there, and to an extent this is mainly because of technology, because to do those Superman movies and those Batman movies, for example, cost an awful lot of money.
Well, there's that, and I think also to be really, really sort of rough and reductive about it, I think you can break up the history of these movies into two eras. You've got everything up until about the turn of the century, and then from about 2000 onwards.
Yeah.
And this isn't just something that affected comic book movies, but to a large extent, the wider geek culture as well.
Yes.
Because the 21st century has been the century of the geek inheriting the earth.
Yeah.
It's things like comics, video games are increasingly being seen more along the lines of mainstream media and being taken more seriously. And up until about late 90s, around 2000, there was the general thing with comic book adaptations was it was being made by people who maybe weren't fans of the source material, making it to try and appeal to people who also weren't necessarily fans. The Crow, for example, is a good example of the opposite, where there was a filmmaker who in a casting crew completely got what that comic was about and was able to translate it in a way that stayed true to the spirit of what that source material was. Which is a lesson that I think has generally been learned in the last 15 years or so, but at that time
wasn't being widely done at all.
No one really got that. And I think that had a lot to do with it, because around 2000, first of all, you got that first X-Men movie.
Yes.
People forget how mind-blowing that movie was when it came out.
Yeah. My little bit of trivia on that movie, Hugh Jackman. Now, Hugh Jackman is an enormously huge star these days. Hugh Jackman was not the first choice for Wolverine.
Yeah, I remember when I first came over to Australia, or came back to Australia, this was in 97, and they were announcing they were finally making the X-Men movie. Like something that had been rumoured about for years, that we'd all fantasised about for years. The amount of fan casting that went into who would play Wolverine.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And they announced it was this guy, Hugh Jackman, who I'd never heard of.
Yeah.
And really, all I found out about him was he did a lot of musicals, and he did hosting work on TV, and just looked like the biggest TV turbo douche.
He is a national treasure.
Well, he is now. But at the time, this was like 1999 or what have you.
And I remember that opening night of X-Men. I went with a bunch of friends. And we went, and this was back in the days where things weren't getting spoiled on the internet every 30 seconds.
People barely even had the internet.
Yeah. I think everyone was still recovering over the Phantom Menace at this point.
Yes.
Because you remember the costumes leaked for X-Men. Everyone lost their minds about, but they don't look like the real costumes. They look like biker gear. What the fuck?
Well, they reference that even in the movie. What would you prefer? Yellow spandex.
Yeah. And I remember the movie starting up, and we were all very, very sort of apprehensive about Hugh Jackman, because the guy looked like a bit of a tool, and we just went, they're gonna screw this up. It took about 15 seconds for Hugh Jackman to win us over, like that.
Yeah.
That first Wolverine scene with the cage fight, and he got the shirt off, and he's cricking his neck and scowling, and we just went, yes, there we go, that's it.
Yes.
And it was just, they got it. Looking back, it wasn't the strongest script.
No.
But they got the feel right. They got the spirit right.
They got the casting right as well. Because the thing is, the person who was supposed to be there would have probably done a reasonable job, Dougray Scott. Now, Dougray Scott ended up not being able to do this movie because of the fact that he was tied into being the bad guy in Mission Impossible 2, so he had to pass on this one. And he'd have made it perfectly, except he's got the physical, but he looks exactly right. I feel to an extent a little bit sad for him, because he's never really gone on to what was expected to be a really amazing film career for him, and partly because of that, he's got a bit of the touch of the Paul McGann's about him. Again, Paul McGann's an interesting one. I think a subject for a future podcast might be those guys who nearly but not quite. But you've got this moment with this. All of the cast in this first X-Men movie are people who know what they're doing, even right down to the likes of Anna Paquin. Anna Paquin, who had been in a few bits and bobs here and there, but since she'd won the Oscar in the piano way back in 1994, that had been, you've not really heard so much from her, and she makes an incredible Rogue. She's a really engaging screen presence. Everyone in there is.
And of course, you got Patrick Stewart as Professor X. Mind you, that was the biggest no-brainer piece of casting in history, because they were rumouring this movie for years. I was imagining this whole time Patrick Stewart's sitting there just going, "Oh, come on, get on with it. I'm here."
He's just looking at the phone.
Yeah. Ring. Engage. Engage.
See, that's the problem. It's engaged all the time.
Bring about bloody time.
So, but also, again, Ian McKellen. Ian McKellen, that wonderful old Queen of a Thesp, really brings a certain menace, but also a brokenness to Magneto.
Yeah.
And the relationship that he's got with Stewart, I mean, the relationship he's still got now, the fact that those two bounce so well off each other, it all works beautifully. And it is that movie, I think it's almost that film is proof of concept. Because that's the point where, okay, oh, well, this worked. Okay, well, here we come.
Yeah.
Spider-Man.
It was very much, it was, oh, wait, you can actually make a film of a comic and make it true to the original.
And also make it a heap of fun and make a ton of money. So then you get your Spider-Man, and then you get your X-Men 2, which is just as good as the first one, if not slightly better. And we'll not talk about X-Men 3, because this is the other thing. This is the point where there is a stumbling moment. And as Australians, I'm sure you'll be familiar with the property that is Superman Returns, as it was filmed in Sydney.
Yeah.
And Brandon Routh, perfectly reasonable, engaging presence. It was a sensible enough idea to cast an unknown. It kind of works. But the fact that they then have Bryan Singer doing you know what, I'm going to pretend this is a sequel to Superman 2. It's been too long, dude. It doesn't quite work. And then you get creepy stalker, deadbeat dad Superman.
Yeah, it was... It was very much a case of good intentions, but it didn't seem properly thought through.
Yeah.
Or it was banking on, I think, an affection for those original movies that wasn't really there anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, the first one is great fun, but they're all fun.
Yeah. Especially, we mentioned this one last time. Drunk Superman fighting Clark Kent in the junkyard in Superman 3. Oh, that's wonderful.
I want the Drunk Superman movie, I really do.
Well, I think we got that. It was called Hancock.
Oh, that was awesome! I love that film! God, that's so good. Will Smith is awesome too.
Yes, he is.
Yes,
but then obviously we have the other moment. This is the moment when we really start to find that the movies have come to maturity. Batman Begins. Because Batman Begins is that first moment when you have a genuine kind of art house sensibility in terms of the storytelling, in terms of the camera angles, in terms of the way the story is told and delivered, meeting the big blockbuster action and an intelligent superhero movie that stands up with the best of all of the filmmaking around at the time. Much in the way that, this is what Nolan does as a filmmaker, and suddenly that is the moment where they've kind of arrived up until that point, but that's the point where they are really finally starting to be taken seriously. And let's not forget Dark Knight.
I would say The Dark Knight even more so.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, with The Dark Knight as well, I mean, what that did, which was kind of, could be seen as a leap forward, is the way that it basically took Batman and dropped him into a crime movie.
On top of which, it's also the first time, or possibly one of the first times, you actually get an acting award, in terms of the Oscar, posthumous though it may well have been, for Heath Ledger. And you have one of the main players getting a serious acknowledgement, because this is the thing, your big blockbuster movies such as your Star Wars or your Bond franchise or any number of different other things, they will often get the technical nods. Bond, the franchise, has got so many different technical Oscars throughout the years, it's not funny, but you will never see them start to actually get the acting goals.
Well, Lord of the Rings really sort of blazed that trail.
Yeah.
With the third one getting best film, that kind of opened it up, at least for a while, briefly.
But this is the thing, and now we find ourselves in the situation where not long after the Batman franchise starts up, we get to the current level of Marvelness. And Marvel could have gone so badly wrong. They picked Robert Downey Jr. for Iron Man, and the eyebrows were raised at the time, because we all remember, I remember watching the likes of Air America back in the early 90s, and films such as that. There was Air America, there was the Chaplin biopic. There's the film that I'm trying desperately to remember at the moment, which is the one where he sees ghosts.
The Sixth Sense?
No, not The Sixth Sense. Yeah.
Sorry.
Heart and Soul.
I love that movie.
Yeah, exactly. There's Heart and Soul.
And that's got Kevin Bacon's wife in it, yeah?
I don't know if Kevin Bacon's wife is it. I don't.
The lady in Batman versus Superman, the judge who gets blown up. She's not a judge, senator or whatever, who gets blown up in that.
No, that's Holly Hunter. That's different.
No, Kyra Sedgwick.
Yes, Kyra Sedgwick
from the
is the person.
Goonies. She was in the Goonies, wasn't she?
No, I think she was in the Goonies, but she has been things like that TV show, The Closer.
Yeah.
Anyway, but this is and then there was that period of the time right the way through the mid-90s and beyond where it's so you're getting arrested a lot for drugs and alcohol.
Hello, prostitutes.
Well, not just that, but I also remember the other moment of his cameo, his regular appearance in Ally McBeal was considered a comeback.
I've forgotten about that.
Yeah, and that's Robert Downey Jr. And then so him being Iron Man, there was the perception of this could be really bad. And
it was the announcement of the whole concept of them making these movies and setting up this huge sort of cinematic universe and essentially doing in blockbuster movies what they've been doing in comics for years, having these separate runs and building up this whole universe. And you've been a fan for a while, or I've been to film school. I've worked on this small films of my own, and you realise the amount of work that goes into any film, not less a big blockbuster, and the amount of politics and the amount of obstacles have to go through.
Yeah,
it sounded insane. There was just no way you're going to be able to sustain this for more than one or two movies.
Yeah,
it's just not going to happen.
And this is the thing.
And I doubted it. To be honest, I turned out to be very wrong, and I'm glad to be wrong. But it was kind of amazing.
This is the thing. Iron Man smashes it out of the park. Thor turns up, and Thor is an interesting one because Iron Man is a risk, but so is Thor. Thor is a massive risk because Thor isn't even a particularly kind of noteworthy person. I don't know much about the source material, so I wasn't even aware of Thor existing as a Marvel's universe kind of character until the movie showed up. And it was okay, well that's an interesting choice. And if that one had tanked, that would have been that. But again, that didn't, and that gives us Chris Hemsworth.
That was never ever going to take Chris Hemsworth in it.
Well, this is
Take a
true.
look. You put an Aussie in a film, it's going to be freaking awesome, especially if they're a superhero. Wolverine.
Though you have got the problem where
we're all very good looking and talented.
Yes.
Well, of course.
And
but the problem with Thor as well, like you've basically got the same premise as the Masters of the Universe movie. The first Thor is basically that movie actually done with a real budget and with genuine craft.
And some scripting.
Yeah, and some scripting.
And without Dolph Lundgren. Let's not beat about the bush here.
Yeah, but we can't have everything.
And you're going on about Chris Hemsworth, but let's not forget the man who makes that franchise, and it's not Chris Hemsworth. It's Tom Hiddleston.
No.
Tom Hiddleston is the man who can walk on screen and all you can hear is the sound of knickers dropping.
No.
Maybe not in your case.
If you're going to say I'm wrong about Jim Carrey, you're wrong about this. And I don't care about all the little fangirls out there. Come at me, bro.
I know, it's fair enough. But it's the thing. Tom Hiddleston does end up
He does do a low-key well.
Yeah.
He is Loki. It's brilliant.
Yeah, and it's also you need that kind of with the Thor and Loki characters. You need people who've got the chemistry that those two very clearly have. And interestingly enough, Hiddleston actually auditioned for and did some screen testing for the role of Thor. Now he was, as it turns out, he wasn't suited for it, but he was perfect for the Loki bit. And actually, also you watch that movie, and most of that film, Loki's right. Loki is actually the person who's no, he's actually got this. Loki understands this. Loki, right the way throughout the movie, you've got no problem with the fact that Loki is actually making all of the right decisions and everyone else is just being a giant douchebag.
Well, also as well, it's that classic sort of dynamic of having the jealous antagonist who actually has a point.
Yeah.
That he's actually right to be jealous.
Yeah.
A lot of superheroes seem to have daddy issues, don't they?
Oh, goodness me, yes. Whether they have a daddy or not.
Mm-hmm.
Batman versus Superman. Orphan fight. Oh, goodness me.
Sorry, I'm stuck on Batman Begins now. I'm still there. It's because of Cillian Murphy.
But then again...
I'm sorry, I'm muttering to myself. I'm sorry, I'm just like... I'm lost again. And the Scarecrow is one of my favourite characters out of... the whole Batman world. Like, he's one of my absolute favorite characters. He's brilliant, and he's brilliant in it.
Cillian Murphy is a very, very, very pretty man.
He's really talented in the cheekbone.
Do both of you need separate rooms now? Or do I have a corridor out here?
I'm sorry.
I'll be in my bunk. Okay, so, but this is the thing. We then also get to my mind, the jewel in the crown in terms of the best movies out there from the Marvel franchise so far, and that's the Captain America movies. Because the first Avenger is a beautiful, beautiful movie to watch.
Yeah, it's very interesting as well from a non-American perspective.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, Captain America, I was familiar with from my time as a kid in the period where I was reading comics. Didn't really remember much about him. And I remember going into that first Captain America movie with a bit of trepidation. You know, is this all just going to be rah-rah, USA?
Yeah.
And is it just not going to be relatable to anyone outside the US? And I think what they've done brilliantly is they've sort of crystallized that character where it's not really about the America aspect. He represents human resilience.
Yeah.
And that fighting spirit. And that's
decency.
The core. And decency. And that's the core of the character. And it makes him relatable to anybody.
On a side note, entirely, the bizarre thing with Captain America was, I remember I walked on the set for Captain America. Because the set for particularly that scene in Brooklyn where he goes into the shop and he actually becomes the kind of the big muscly guy and all that kind of stuff, that was a street or a long street in Manchester's northern quarter. So this would be Manchester in the UK, in the north of England. And I was there for going to see a Bare Naked Ladies gig with my then partner, and we wandered through and it was all closed off for the day, and like all the filming was done, but all of the kind of the shop front labels and so on and so forth were all kind of there on these buildings. And clearly, obviously, there's been an awful lot of green screen and other things done to make it look like Brooklyn. And it's basically, you've got a street that would look right for the part. And it's just kind of weird that walk down that street doesn't look anything quite like that. But cool, yeah, go for that. That's really good. And again, it's beautiful because the Captain America movies are there at the heart of the Marvel franchise. I mean, everything else is kind of, there's an element of big and dumb and explodey. First Avengers movie is great. Obviously, you've got all of the coming together, all these characters. There's reasons for them to be there. It's sassy, it's witty, it's beautifully well done. It's Joss Whedon very much kind of at the peak of his game. And that appeared to be setting up a whole new and interesting world. But because we're going to be discussing a little bit later on the future of comic book movies and also to an extent the present, I feel there is something that we have been ignoring somewhat, or if not ignoring, then we haven't really covered, which is what we're looking at from our perspective is mostly American and to an extent British comic book movies. But there's a whole bunch of other ones that we haven't even started to cover, and to that, I'm going to give you to our Japan correspondent in Chani.
Konnichiwa. Hajime watashi wa Chani desu. But moving on, I spent like a lot of time, like growing up. I spent a lot of time. I just repeated myself. I'm doing well today. I watched a lot of anime growing up. Like whatever I could get my hands on at the local video store, old VHS tapes. Be Kind, Rewind. And whatever happened to be on SBS on a Saturday night. So I spent a lot of time exploring that kind of world because they had these movies coming out and I was watching them, and then I'd find out like online or by reading and stuff that these were actually based upon comics. There were so many of them. There were things like Ghost in the Shell, there's Akira, everyone knows Akira, not everyone likes it, but
I like it.
Yeah, it's good. Like, there's also, like, those two are, they're anime movies. So they look how the comic books look. It's pretty much the same thing, and they are good movies. Like, they stay true to the story. I think it's because, they are animated. They can do whatever they want. They can make it look exactly like
and of course, later on, you also
get
some of the Studio Ghibli adaptations as well. Yeah. Things like Laputa Castle in the Sky, and there's a whole bunch of these. Most of these movies, again, you would have found in the UK, we'd have got them via Channel 4 and Film 4. Maybe some people would have had them on DVDs and videos. I remember, again, this was back in 1995. I had a friend of mine come from one end of the country to the other end of the country that summer where I was living with my parents, and he was kind of like right down from Scotland to the south coast so that I could drive him the 30 miles to a hotel near Portsmouth because there was a one-day anime conference or convention of sorts. And he came back, he was ridiculously happy because he managed to get hold of a bunch of videos for stuff that he wouldn't have necessarily seen for like a couple of months, a few months to a years, because he'd managed to get this. And that was how hard it was to get hold of some of the source material, particularly if you lived in provincial UK. Yeah. I can't imagine what it would have been like here in Australia.
Yeah, I lived in rural country Victoria.
Exactly, yeah.
There was 2 DVDs not DVDs, VHS tapes at the video store. There was Wicked City and Mermaid's Flesh. They were just 2 random movies, but they were the only 2 anime movies that I could get my hands on. So I watched those religiously, which was cool. But moving on, there's also the live action comic book adaptions that also came out. Like Itchy the Killer is one of my favorite movies. It is sadistic and messy and gory and absolutely hilarious at the same time. Like, it's just one of those films I love it. I can't get enough of it. I've got like the special DVD case edition. I'm not wording.
Yeah, Takashi Miike is a very, very strange man, and God bless him for it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the world needs strange men as filmmakers.
True. And recently they did like the live action Attack on Titan, which was fantastic. Like, I've seen the part 1. I'm not sure about part 2 if it's out yet or not, or if it's coming out soon, but that was brilliant. And the CGI on that, like the Titans themselves, creeped me out. Yeah. Like, and I'm a big horror person. I play horror video games. I watch horror films all the time, horror comics as well. I love gore and all that kind of nasty stuff. So it takes a little bit to set me on edge and kind of gross me out. But these creatures unnerved me to a bit where I was like,
And that's a very good thing. I mean, even back in... That is hard to do, and the fact that you've got somebody who is, you're not exactly someone who's going to say completely desensitized, but you see a lot of this, and to find something that can then creep people who are genuine aficionados out, that's not easy.
Yeah, that's what I this is the thing about these kind of films that I've seen coming out in Japan, whether it is animated or whether it is live. To me, they're great films, and to other people that I've spoken to, they think they're great too, but they have no idea that they're based upon comics.
Yeah.
And I think that's also what makes it great, because people don't walk in, well, obviously, in Japan, this probably isn't the case. They're probably very well-known mangas and TV series and stuff too, but from seeing it outside of Japan, you don't go in going, oh, I know the source material, I've got to see how it compares to this and that. And so you just walk in seeing it as just a fresh slate movie that you're just interested in. And I think that changes a lot on how people perceive these things. Like, they're not judging against.
Well, I think it seems to be, I don't know as much about this, but it very much seems to be much more ingrained with the part of Japanese culture, and they've always generally been taken seriously, because if nothing else, I mean, animated serials have been there with us for an awfully long time on TV, back in since the 70s. I mean, we remember kind of growing up watching the likes of Battle of the Planets.
Yeah.
Then later on, you get the kind of the Macross series. You've got the French-Japanese adaptations of Ulysses 31 and Cities of Gold. You've got Thunderbirds 2086, and you've got all of the various different other properties like the Neon Genesis Evangelion and so on and so forth. All of those things right the way through the 80s, where this is strongly no, this is fine, this is mainstream. But and yeah, obviously Japan has its uber nerds and people will recognize them as nerds, but this is much more a part of the culture there, whereas it's taken an awful long time, as Cav pointed out earlier on, for this kind of level of nerdery that we've all kind of been at home with for a long time to become almost acceptable very much acceptable mainstream culture within westernized societies. Now, talking of which, and this will bring us afterwards nicely back into where we're going further with this, there are enough murmurs around about the upcoming Ghost in the Shell adaptation.
Don't get me started on this. It's just, in a word, whitewashing.
Yes.
and it sucks. It sucks so much. Like, they're changing, from what I hear, they're changing the name of the main character. Well, they're not changing it. Like, in the anime, it's Major Motoko Kusanagi, but in this film, like this live action one, that Scarlett Johansson, is it Scarlett Johansson? I got it right this time.
Yeah, Scarlett Johansson.
Not Charlize Theron.
Yeah.
Although I do stand by the fact that they are the same person.
As I was saying earlier on, I really want to see Scarlett Johansson's Imperator Furiosa.
But that's the thing. Like, this is an Asian character. She's a Japanese character, and now she's going to be played by, I think Scarlett Johansson's like half Polish.
Yeah.
Anyway, she's a white chick, and they're going to be changing the name from what I hear to just be calling her the Major, because it'd be kind of weird to have a white chick with, you know, a very Japanese name.
Bear in mind, this has already happened in that movie with Emma Stone, the Hawaiian one. I think it's called Aloha or something like that, where the character that it was based on was very much a kind of an Asian.
Yeah,
and it's only Emma Stone. Yeah, you don't really look. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was the same with a movie that Angelina Jolie was in as well. She, I can't remember it. I think she was playing. I don't know. I'm not gonna continue because I'm going to fuck it up and I'm going to sound really bad.
But this is the problem. The whitewashing idea, I mean, this is not to take on great. Scarlett Johansson is an amazing screen presence. We love the Black Widow character. Lucy was a really fun film. She's really good at this kind of stuff, and she would be able to nail a large amount of it reasonably well. But when you have somebody who is not of the original race, this can be problematic. I mean, even, it's not whitewashing in any way, shape or form, but a really good movie adaptation of a comic book source is V for Vendetta, which is wonderful. But for anyone who is English, it's wonderful right up until the point where Natalie Portman starts speaking, because her English accent doesn't quite work. Even to the same way that, for example, Quentin Tarantino's Australian accent doesn't work in Django Unchained.
That never bothered me so much. I really love the film adaptation of V for Vendetta. I mean, I love the original graphic novel, but that's an example where you have an original and the adaptation, and they're all very different from each other, but they both work.
Yes.
And that's really cool. I was fine with Natalie Portman's English accent. I mean, at least Tarantino's Australian accent was funny.
That's because
Shut the thicker blick.
Oh, God.
That's because Australian accents are
He's
funny.
like a South African with a cold.
I'm not even going to get started on my... I have been living in this country for nearly 4 years now, and my Australian accent, whilst it is getting better, it's still not something I want to have coming out in public. I might get arrested. Oh, no, that's no. It's my Australian accent. Sorry. But anyway, moving on. So the Ghost in the Shell adaptation, that's a forthcoming adaptation. And to an extent, we're looking now at where are we at with comic book movies and where are we going? Now,
okay, there's one other thing that is coming up that has already pissed me off. And that is Doctor Strange. And this is the same kind of thing that what's going on with Ghost in the Shell. The character that Tilda Swinton. Told you, can't do names. The character that she plays, I can't pitch the name right off the top of my head. In the original books and like the comic books and stuff, it's a small Asian dude. Now we've got this tall, white, British English chick playing it.
This is the thing, again, a wonderful performer. Has been for an awfully long time. She is a brilliant performer, but whether or not she's the right person for this role is questionable. I mean, granted, yes, you've got Chiwetel Ejiofor and Bindi Bob Crumblesnitch playing.
So what are you saying? Oh, Bumblebee Crumplebottom.
Anyway, they're going to be engaging leads. They're going to be fantastic.
And it's got Mads Mikkelsen in it.
Nice.
And I love him.
Yes.
I'm a huge Hannibal Lecter fan.
Bizarrely enough, I think it's actually supposed to be pronounced Mass.
Oh, Mass?
Yeah.
Mads?
Yeah.
I don't know. I know too many Madeleines. This is always...
Yeah, Mads Mikkelsen will do for the Mads.
You know, Maz.
Yeah.
My mate Maz. It's cool. But
Maddie Mixon.
he's cool,
Yes.
man.
Bonza.
But this is the thing that pisses me off. It's like, I don't understand why they do this. Why they change from comic book. It's like it's been around for a while and someone has been established as this race, this sex. Why do they have to change that?
A lot of it is to do with unfortunately, the way the film industry has always been set up is to actually secure the funding for these movies. They have to establish that they can make it into a bankable product. So that means stars. That means finding someone who is going to appeal to a mass audience. And
it's interesting enough, sometimes as well, it is also... There are sometimes when the original source material can be somewhat dodgy in terms of its stereotyping. Now, interestingly enough, Iron Man 3, when you look at the character of the Mandarin, the way that Ben Kingsley plays the Mandarin in Iron Man 3 is actually just being like an out-of-work British actor. And the way that's handled, that's actually handled really rather well. Sometimes it's not to excuse the whitewashing in any way, shape, or form, but it's still something where you think, "Hang on,
it's tackling the ridiculousness head on and making something out of it." Yeah,
you couldn't find tiny Asian dudes in America. Was George Takei not available?
I think it's actually the character's Peruvian.
No, well, look,
or Tibetan.
Yeah, Tibetan would make more sense because I've seen the robes, but that's about it. But
not Peruvian. Oh God.
This is the thing. Where we are now, that we are kind of... Yeah, that's Peruvian. That's like panpipes.
Yeah, no. Definitely not that.
Yeah. Where we are now, we are at somewhat of a crossroads because, for example, last year, there was Age of Ultron, which it made a ton of money and it had some interesting ideas, but was the first of the Marvel films that you started to think, really?
I like that movie. I think it's a classic example of this movie came in with an absolute shitload of expectation, especially not just following the first Avengers, but also The Winter Soldier, which I watched again last night, and it's a fucking great movie. I think Age of Ultron is one of the films that later years is going to be looked on a bit more fondly.
Yeah.
I just think it didn't meet everyone's expectations at the time.
To an extent as well, it's also you expect an Avengers movie to be this is a big climactic... Oh, hang on a minute, this feels like you're just part one of a story. Oh.
Yeah, and that first Avengers movie was just so friggin' euphoric.
Yeah, it was climactic. There was an element of... They could have just, you know what, after that, if you wanted to, we can leave it there, we're done. Everyone's happy.
Yeah, it was 2 hours of geek money shots.
Yeah.
And I think coming in with the second one, I understand why they wanted to do it. They wanted to start layering in this conflict within the team and continuing to raise these questions of whether they're doing is right. But it was being so downbeat, following on from that high of the first film.
Yeah.
Winter Soldier did it better because it was a Captain America movie.
Yep.
People weren't expecting the same thing, and it gave a bit of space to do that.
Now, other things that had interesting directions regarding that in the last year, obviously there was the Ant-Man movie, which is great because suddenly you've got the Marvel Cinematic Universe telling smaller stories.
I haven't seen it.
Without no pun intended, but it's telling us. It's basically this is telling the story of. At its heart, there is the story of Michael Douglas's Hank Pym being worried about what his kind of technology for the Ant-Man character what might happen to it if it falls into what he deems to be the wrong hands. But also, you then got Paul Rudd's character, who is just a guy who wants to keep his family together after having spent some time in prison. And it is very much, it's told on a much smaller scale because the stakes are smaller. Again, without wishing any puns in this at all, but it's dealing with families. It's dealing with... It's not the end of the world. It's not the whole universe imploding upon itself unless you push this button over here at precisely the right time without hitting too many people and not going through any tripwires or whatever else you've got to be doing. And it was funny and it was silly and it was just a nice little side. And again, it's still related within the cinematic universe. So that kind of worked. But then you also have other adaptations which have failed to find their way a little bit. I mean, there was the Amazing Spider-Man movies with Andrew Garfield, and the first one was perfectly acceptable. I've not seen the second, but I've not heard wonderful things. Then with last year, we have the Fantastic Four movie.
I haven't seen that one. I like the first one. I like the original. The original one.
Well, the ones back in the day with that.
Captain America.
Yes, exactly. I've not seen the second one of those, but also this one was interesting because this is the movie that the guy who directed it had previously done the kind of supernatural teen flick Chronicle. And he clearly had a very different movie in mind. I mean, there was all the publicity of like a tweet that got hastily deleted of this, effectively saying this movie sucks because it wasn't what I wanted to do. And from what I gather, he was very much coming from much more of an angle of body horror and kind of people being kind of genuinely disturbed by their new abilities, and the bosses at Sony or wherever it was, because they said, turn around and say, you can't have that sort of, and ordered a whole bunch of reshoots, which basically turned the film into an absolute turkey. I'm not saying it was going to be great beforehand, but it would have been interesting to have seen, because it was somebody who was clearly, they saw his work and thought, "Ooh, he could be interesting. He's an interesting up and comer. Let's see what he could." Oh God, no! No! We can't sell cereal boxes from that.
Well, I think there's probably a lot more to it that hasn't been revealed, because I mean, Josh Trank was also hired to do another one of the Star Wars side movies,
Right.
and about a week before Fantastic Four came out, he was fired from it.
Interesting.
So this was Disney.
Yeah.
So there may have been more to that. Who knows? But it was a very sort of confusing lead up, a very confusing situation.
See, at the moment, we are in an interesting place because Marvel is clearly building up to the next big Avengers movie. So we've got, obviously, there's Guardians of the Galaxy 2 next year coming out. We're starting to see the trailers now for Captain America Civil War, which is looking like it's going to be a really, really, really good film.
There's been early sort of word come out. They've started screening it to critics, and all of the word so far has been glowing. So yeah, looking forward to that one.
But this is the other thing. Marvel has an incredible advantage because, again, if I refer back to Ant-Man, Ant-Man is a story in and of itself, right the way on its own, but it's got the little nods here and there to other parts of the cinematic universe. For example, who's the guy with the wings? Falcon. Yeah, Falcon turns up in Ant-Man, and the new Avengers base from the end of Age of Ultron, that turns up in Ant-Man. It's just a little nod to the... It's like all it needs to do is just slightly establish that things are within the same universe. And it doesn't need to say any more. For example, TV adaptations. Now, again, we're talking about smaller stories. You can tell smaller, better characterized stories with the stuff that Netflix is doing. So you've got the likes of Daredevil, where at the beginning of the first season, when Nelson and Murdoch are looking for offices, they're being taken around a place, and I think it's one of the real estate agent says something about it, and then everything was going fine, and then suddenly a bunch of aliens fell out of the sky and dropped something on the city, and then it's a small little reference that doesn't need to have any more said about it. It's right, fine, well, we're there. We're clearly in the same place as all of these, but we're telling this story over here. And you've got that with Daredevil, with Jessica Jones, being able to tell properly characterized, in-depth stories. And the same thing's going to happen with Luke Cage, probably with Iron Fist when that comes out. And all of the various different Defenders line. You can tell that kind of localized stuff. You can tell... It will be interesting to see what happens with regards to Spider-Man.
They should just let Spider-Man die.
It's unlikely to. I mean, they can properly reboot it with... I mean, he's got the backwards reboot coming from Civil War now, and there is going to be a new Spider-Man movie on the back of that with the same guy. So, it potentially it could work. But this is the thing. There have been, since Ultron, you start to find the first grumbles of comic book movies. They're not all that good. And people are starting to say, they're done. They're finished with. No, we can't do anything more with them. No, they're oversaturation. There's too many of them. And to an extent, you can see where critics who have those kind of views, where they're coming from on this. But I would suggest that no, because I would suggest in many ways they're just starting to find their feet. And in fact, actually, for some of the more interesting comic franchise and comic properties, you have got a massive amount that you can do on the small screen. We've already mentioned the Netflix series. There's also, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is in its third series, and a fourth has been commissioned already for next year. And that's just running along very happily alongside the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and kind of with occasional reference to it. Agent Carter, one of their best properties out there at all. That's such a lot of fun. Yeah,
I'm waiting to see if we get a third season of that. It's not looking good.
I think
it's actually going to legitimately bum me out if we don't get a third season.
I've got to say, I'm with you on that. Well, because I think it's because Hayley Atwell may have been contracted for something else, and it's one of those, when's she going? Oh, damn it, because it would be so good. But again, I mean, looking at Captain America, we've got Dominic Cooper, who is now switching over to a different franchise. You've got Preacher, which is out later on in the year, and Preacher could be legitimately amazing. I mean, there's one area where the ethnicity of one of the leads is going to change completely, but I don't think it's going to bother anybody because, I mean, for example, the character of Tulip, who is supposed to be this kind of white, blonde, very much kind of American hustler kind of a chick, is being played by Ruth Negga, who is Black, British, and Ethiopian in her heritage. And it's in fact, no, actually not British. I think she's Irish. Sorry, my apologies. But she's British Isles, so she's not American. She's kind of doesn't look anything like the source material. But you know what? Who cares? Let's go with this because she's a really good performer. This is a girl who played Flowers in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., so she's somebody who's cut her chops on this kind of stuff. I'm wondering how long it's going to take before somebody else from Misfits shows up in the show, because Misfits, the UK show, that seems to have been a finishing school for pretty much every bit of American genre television, either Misfits or Skins.
Which network is doing Preacher again? Was that AMC?
Yes, it is AMC, so the same people who do Walking Dead.
Yeah.
And Seth Rogen's one of the producers.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of this as well, it really depends on who's handling the show.
Yeah.
And how far they're willing to go, especially with things like Preacher, where, there's a lot of stuff in Preacher where if you put that in a show in front of a mainstream audience, it's going to be interesting.
But then Walking Dead.
Front. Yeah.
See, this is the thing.
But then again, zombies, in a way, you can get away with a lot more with zombies than you can with religion.
I think the thing we're looking for here is the comic book movie adaptations and the success of them, and the fact that you've largely run out of most of the superheroes. Because most of the main big superheroes have kind of been done. And as a result, and they're successful, like their ongoing franchises, even the reinvention of the X-Men movies, which we haven't really covered here so much, and I think has been really rather well done. And First Class was an amazing movie. And for, the presences of the likes of Fassbender and McAvoy have they have been a joy to watch. I mean, Michael Fassbender could sit there reading a phone book out wearing sackcloth and ashes, and you'd still watch it for 2.5 hours. He's got that kind of a presence. But those movies, because there's no more you can necessarily do with them, and in fact X-Men proves that because they've had to go back to the 70s to reinvent that in terms of the rebirth of the X-Men. Now, because of that, they've opened the door for some of these smaller franchises, smaller properties, to be able to, and less well-known properties, to get somewhere. So you have likes of The Walking Dead, you have Preacher, there is talk, and there has been for a while, of Why the Last Man. There's talk of The Boys being made into a series. All of these things are amazing ideas.
And also there's a bit of a history for this. Yeah. I mean, for example, History of Violence came from a graphic novel.
Yeah.
Road to Perdition, a graphic novel. It's now and again...
From
Hell as well. These sort of more obscure, non-superhero comics have snuck through into movies in the past. But certainly, I mean, look, with TV, it does widen the opportunities because of that chance for longer-form storytelling.
And obviously, the most recent news is an interesting one, and I'm not sure exactly why it is, but there's talk of the fact that the Inhumans movie, which is following a large chunk of the stuff that's being dealt with currently in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., has been pushed back slightly, although I'm not entirely sure for the reasons why on that. I think we can go into that for detail further down the line. So, in summary, comic books, where do we think they're going in terms of their movie adaptations? Are we about to experience a last hurrah with the rest of this Marvel leading up to kind of Avengers Infinity War 1 and 2? And do you think we're kind of done after that? Or where do you think we're going? I mean, has the movie adaptation of comic books for now shot its bolt?
Well, it's never a case of whether it's going to be done, because I think these things, history's proven it never finishes. But it does sort of ebb and flow a bit. Marvel's doing a great job now. I really think it depends on the quality of the movies. I know it's a bit of a truism there, it's a bit obvious, but if they can keep up the quality level, they can go as long as they want.
Because it's interesting as also, after our discussion on the last podcast, DC is all over the place. Yeah,
if anything, looking at where DC is at and the approach Warner Brothers is taking, and CW and CBS and the other 15 networks who have DC shows at the moment, I can see that creating a burnout.
Yeah,
more than anything Marvel are doing.
Partly because of the fact that Marvel has coherence to every last bit of it. It seems to be planned, and to an extent, every project is independent, but there is one kind of group of people who are overall in charge of the whole story, and they kind of give this. So they give Netflix, for example, as a network where they have followed the HBO model of, okay, we will trust the creatives to do their thing, and they'll come back with a thing, and we can then screen. And to an extent, Marvel has been able to do that. Whereas because of the fact that with DC, you've got a lot of different competing things, and for example, CBS and the CW have certain things that they are going to expect in any property that they are going to be adapting. That is going to put certain restrictions on and make it harder for it to be coherent. The other interesting thing is the amazing success of Deadpool. Deadpool way over and performed in terms of the expectations, and over the last few weeks has been that, maybe R-rated comic book movies are the way to go. And there's this talk of the R-rated Batman versus Superman DVD, because really we don't need a director's cut. We don't need any more of that. Give Ben Affleck Batman, let him go off and have his fun there. He'll be great. Keep Zack Snyder in a locked cupboard well away from this. In fact, just keep Zack Snyder in a locked cupboard.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Deadpool is that got so much right. I mean, going back to the same thing as we were talking about before, the same principles. Knowing who the character is, knowing how they work best.
Yeah.
Trusting in the source material for it to work.
Ryan Reynolds has wanted to do this for years.
Yeah.
And he is somebody who really has the source material. I mean, Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool, that's kind of like the same thing as we've got with the likes of Peter Capaldi and David Tennant being the Doctor, because those are guys who are fanboys right the way through, and as a result kind of, I got this, and have been waiting for a while to have the opportunity to do this, and nailed it pretty much when they got there. And Ryan Reynolds has the opportunity to do this because he's been waiting for this for a long time. And this is one of the reasons as well, because I trust Ben Affleck with Batman, because despite the mess that he was given with regards to Dawn of Justice, he still was one of the standout things from that movie, and potentially could take this and do really well with it, because he understands where he's coming from. And frankly, if nothing else, he will incur the ire of Kevin Smith if he fucks it up.
Yeah. It's I mean, it's made that's a case of this. You trust what the source material is, and you want to adapt that while keeping that spirit. Whereas, as opposed to going in with an idea that you have to work against the source material or change it or change the focus, in your own image. I mean, certainly Affleck, I think, is much more in touch with that world and has a much better understanding of that.
Okay, well, for the moment, I think this is going to have to wrap all of this up. So this has been a slightly longer and more extended podcast than we will normally do. We'll be trying to keep this down to kind of 30 to 45 in the future. But in the meanwhile, we will get another one of these bad boys out as soon as we possibly can. If you want to get hold of us, you can get hold of Cav on...
Yep, you can read my stuff in Metro Magazine, Australia, which comes out quarterly. Latest couple of issues, I have articles on Mad Max Fury Road and also Elixir.
And Chani?
You can find me on YouTube and Twitter on the handle of PrimaCat. I also have a Facebook page as well for all my gaming videos.
And obviously you can get hold with me and all of us here under There Will Be Geek page. There will be very shortly a There Will Be Geek Facebook group up and running for you guys to express your opinions on as well. And there we can find us on Geek Twitter at There Will Be Geek. And other than that, there's only one more thing left for us to say. We're finished!